Hey there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. My pronouns are she, her. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, my weekly show where I still bring good vibes to DEI. That is good vibes to diversity, equity, and inclusion with a little dash of corporate social responsibility. What I've found is there are lots of news stories about what's going wrong in the world, and lots of negative data. But there are also a lot of things going right. That's what I like to focus on. I search for stories that we can be inspired by and learn from. My hope is to inspire you to experiment with these actions and policies to help you build a more inclusive world. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Greg Morley, he, him, speaker and HR thought leader and author of Bond, Belonging and the Keys to Inclusion and Connection. This week, our conversation is about spreadsheets saving lives, vacation rentals finally getting accessible, and the only lesbian film fest in a quilting town. All right, let's get started. Greg, welcome to the show. Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I couldn't be more aligned with your thinking. So when we made this connection, I was so thrilled to come in connection with you and also be on the podcast. So thank you so much for being a kindred spirit and also having me on board.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's
so
my
I'm
pleasure.
I'm a very proud product of the Philadelphia area, and I'm currently living in Paris for the second time with my husband. I've spent my life living and working across the US and around the world. I've been very fortunate that way and have spent close to 25 years now living outside the US, looking back in, and mostly in Asia and Europe. I was fortunate in my career to work for companies like GE, Disney, Hasbro, and LVMH. And I'm now spending my time as a speaker, a strategic advisor, and dare I say the word author, which I'm still trying to come to terms with as a published author.
Well, I took a look at your book. I read about half of it so far. I promised to finish it, and I think it's great. I mean, what I love about your book Bond is that it has so many personal stories. You know, from your growing up to coming out and what that was like, and some of your stories from those various companies. So. Stories are always the way to, I think, help folks open up and see what's possible for them. So, thank you for sharing those stories in the book.
It's my pleasure. I felt like inclusion as a practice was becoming an exclusive club, and
Mm,
one of the reasons I wrote the book was to try to open up in a very accessible way discussions around diversity and inclusion. And by using my own stories and the stories of other people that I interviewed, I hope that we could kind of destigmatize the discussions around diversity and inclusion because, as you would read in the book, I made plenty of mistakes in my career. And I share those quite transparently because I think that's the way one learns and grows. And I want people to feel like, okay, those are conversations I can have
mm.
with others and not be afraid of what we're trying to achieve.
And I think that talking about mistakes strengthens bonds, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's part of how it works because there's been this sort of archetype of leaders over time where they have to sort of have a be stiff and be authoritarian or and really not let their emotions show. And so I think humility is such an underrated leadership quality, and the fact that you talk about your own mistakes so openly is really beautiful.
Yeah, and I think also the ability to open up is a way to inspire other people. So,
Mhm.
leaders have a responsibility to the people they lead, and
Mhm.
leaders have a responsibility to create safe spaces at work. So, you can't dictate people's personal lives; that their personal lives run on their own timetable. But if at work people feel like, okay, I come here, I have a boss who understands me,
Mhm.
uh, she supports me, he supports me, then that is a way for people to really become themselves as they can't be maybe in the rest of work. And while that all sounds nice, it's great for business because if somebody has that kind of arrangement or that feeling at work, they're more productive, they're more creative, they're more innovative, and that means the company also benefits from those things. So there's no downside to those types of environments and cultures at work.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and back to, walking on eggshells or being sort of afraid of saying the wrong thing. I do think that we did get into a place of being a little exclusive. I know that a lot of folks have felt over the years, or the past few years, that they don't know what to say. They're afraid of getting it wrong. They're afraid of being canceled, and they don't necessarily understand the concept that inclusion means everyone. So
Yeah,
I think your book does a really nice job of bringing everyone under the tent.
yeah, yeah. And it's not our judge. It shouldn't be our job to judge. It should be our
Hmm.
job to help people develop, like we do in the rest of the world of work. Right? We're always trying to help people get better and develop, and we say you make mistakes and you can be better. And I really believe that this is one of the great opportunities of this moment, which is we can recalibrate the way we talk about diversity and inclusion and remind everybody it's so important to the business. It's important that I speak to my consumers in their language. It's important that somebody walks into my place of business and they feel like they belong there. They see themselves represented in there. And I feel like this period of time, this feels tough now. It is tough now. And certainly for a lot of practitioners, it's a difficult time.
Yeah.
It's an opportunity for a bit of a renaissance, and
Yeah.
it can take us to the next level in what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'll tell you before I get into the intro for this newsletter, I'll tell you that I'm sort of refocusing on my initial approach to this work, which is inclusion for client-facing employees. I mean,
Mm,
it's not the DEI budget, and these are folks who are afraid of saying the wrong thing in front of their clients, who don't necessarily know how to recover if they make a mistake. And because of that fear of cancel culture and fear of getting it wrong, I think that there's become less authenticity in these relationships. So I think there's
yeah,
incredible value in, at least for me, bringing the conversation there, which aligns with my previous work in the wedding industry.
no, no, that's amazing. Yeah, and also you imagine somebody has a hesitation to talk to a client. They also, that's not good selling. So
Exactly.
they're not going to have insight into that person's behaviors, needs, desires, wants, because they'll be afraid of opening different doors. And so doing that kind of work that you're doing is very, very good for the business, and it's also going to make those people feel much more rewarded in the work they're doing. And of course, the clients will feel like, okay, this person really knows who I am.
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, let's move into this week's intro for five things. So I wrote this week about how, about a week ago, I woke up and I was like, oh my gosh, it's Pride Month coming up and business is so slow. I mean, the crickets compared to years past are frankly devastating, and it makes it hard to have pride. So
Mhm.
that was something I was struggling with for last week, and I ended up tearing up in front of a client. And,
Mm.
in a moment like that, it can feel embarrassing, right?
Mm.
But it ended up being connective.
That's
And
amazing.
just a good reminder that lean into the vulnerability.
Yeah,
It makes us human. And, for me, it was just another reminder of how important this good vibes work is,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
I need to be shining the light on what's working for myself too, right?
Mm.
To
Absolutely.
keep myself staying positive.
I'm thinking about Pride season with a little bit of sort of, it's like a baseball game. I don't know what the outcome's going to be. So, normally in Pride, you could kind of determine what it was going to look like.
Hmm.
And I think about this Pride as sort of month 12,
Hmm.
because Pride normally is it's a celebration because we look back at what's happened, and then we sort of, why it's like month 12, we're a bit budgeting for what's happening next. And so I think about it in like a business calendar way. But this year is very unpredictable because we can see some signs that it's going to be different.
Hmm.
Whether that's good or bad, I don't think that's still maybe to be determined. It will be both, I think, good and bad. But also it could be again something that we come out of Pride this time. I hope with more of a commitment that we're just in month one, that we don't get sort
Hmm.
of Pride month and then we move on to the next month of the next celebration. So that's my hope for Pride this year, that we maybe step back from the glam of it, and we really determine that pride is something that needs to be a 12-month activation, and
Hmm.
as you've talked about in other podcasts, it needs to be built into the way that we work.
Absolutely. It sure does. It sure does. Well, hopefully that means good news for business if it's a 12-month activation,
I hope
right?
so. I
um,
think there's something to it, because I was supposed to do an event in Hong Kong this month and it was canceled. And it was a big consulting firm. Yet there's probably hope that they will do it a little bit later when they can take it out of the direct spotlight and things have calmed down a
mm,
little. So I do think that there's hope. And if you look a little bit forward, you look over the wall. It's not a cliff. There's ground over there.
that's right. Well, and there's always hope, right? Absolutely always hope. All right. Well, let's move into this week's good vibes. The first story this week comes from Qatar, which is hosted its first ever career fair for disabled people on May 10th. Hilton Hotels was one of the employers represented. So, this is a region where 80% of disabled residents remain unemployed. So, this is a huge deal. And Deloitte's 2024 study shows that U.S. disabled employees unemployment is at about 8%. So, Qatar is significantly higher than that. So, this career fair is huge.
I thought this was amazing because I don't know if you saw who the other employer was, which was the U.S. Embassy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Did.
all is not dead in DE&I in the U.S. government. I thought that was a hopeful sign. I worked for a good bit of my career in hospitality at Disney, and I can tell you that the business case for accessibility is very strong.
Mm.
It's a portion of the population that, when served, I think later on there was one of the other stories that this is $58 billion market. Um, and the challenge that Qatar is able to overcome is, in the developed world, one of the biggest challenges to accessibility is retrofitting. So you have old subways, old buildings, old offices, old hotels, and there's a culture of inclusion that's better for accessibility that plays out in the unemployment numbers. But when then you look at places in the world that are rapidly developing, like Shanghai, Guangzhou, Singapore, Hong Kong, they have actually much more accessibility in their infrastructure. They just have less accessibility in their culture. So
Mm.
this is where I think there's some hope for a east-west bridge, because there's a lot of expertise in the West about accessibility and accessibility culture. And now you see in developing areas around the world, especially those that have more money, you have the facility, but maybe not the culture. So there's an
Mhm.
opportunity for people who are doing consulting in this space specifically to grab onto that, because I think that that's what's going to grow. And then the expertise around facilities will come back to the West.
Mm. I love that. Oh, well, I will share that commentary with some of my friends who specialize in the accessibility space. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. The second story this week is also about accessibility. So, Verbo, which is a home share program, is stepping up for travelers with disabilities by rolling out 8 new accessibilities features in their search. So, features like stair free entry, accessible parking, and handrails. So, people with disabilities can have an easier time finding vacation rentals that meet their real world mobility needs. So this comes with a new partnership with Becoming Rentable that has trained VRB hosts, Verbo hosts, 10-minute training for them. And as you said before, this is a $58 billion annual market globally.
Yeah. So this is this is again gets back to the business of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
So there are not a lot of huge, big chunks of business that companies can just go after. They have to nurture it. In this specific area of just being accessible, what's very powerful, and again, this is my experience in Disney, is that the disability community is very strong. So they
Mm.
talk to each other. Okay, this is a good place to go. You'll be treated well. Don't go there. That's not going to be a good experience. So when I worked for Disney, there was a real passion for providing safe and accessible experiences. And people came back year over year, because they knew that. They knew that the environment would be great for them and their families. And I think in this world, actually, AI is going to be a huge help,
Mm.
because a lot of companies, these smaller platforms, may not have as much resource to continue to develop their sites, but AI can help them through FAQ bots and things like that to answer questions that people will ask. Isn't it accessible location or not? And once they start to build up their dictionary of information, that's going to help travelers who are interested in that kind of information. And the last thing I would say about this is, if you believe, as you should, that employee resource or business resource groups are important, this is an area where companies can double down on it. Because if a company like the one you spoke of, or an experience I had where I was told a story at Uber, when they went to the employees who represented those groups of consumers and they tapped into them, they were able to redesign the consumer experience without actually spending a whole lot of money, because they didn't need consultants. They had people who, take an Uber to work in the morning, and they have an issue of accessibility, and they talked to them and they said, how can we do better? So this is an area where companies have a huge resource within their organization, and it's the people who represent their consumers. And if they don't, then they need to build up that part of their diverse employee base.
No, I completely agree. I've talked about that in other five things. I think that's how some of Uber and Lyft's most recent feature rollouts came about. Absolutely. All right, the third story this week comes from Paducah, Kentucky, where I spent a week when I was 22, and I did go to the Quilt Museum there. So Paducah, Kentucky has transformed into a sanctuary for queer women every Memorial Day through Cinema Sisters, the only all-lesbian film festival in the U.S. I'm a bad lesbian. I knew nothing about this. I've never been. But it has screened in an eclectic mix of lesbian-centered films across genres. And, this is pretty cool for visibility in a place known for quilts rather than queer film.
So you went to Paducah for quilts, not for the Lesbian Film Festival.
No, I went to Paducah to do a service trip as a young college student. And we ended up doing there was a flood, and we did sandbagging and all that. And I happened to go to the Quilt Museum that week.
Well, now you have a reason to go back.
That's true.
So, yeah, I would say, way to go, Paducah, Kentucky. And what I was reflecting on when I read this story is that the first thing is community matters.
Mm-hmm.
We hear so much talk about things like ban books and ban this. And the reality is, information for people is much more accessible than what we can find between books. Now, those types of things send a message, but film festivals have always been a powerful outlet in bringing community together, and for the filmmakers to tell their stories, because they can commercialize the story, and then they have the funding to do it. And so I think that my experience with film festivals, and this one I'm really curious about the experience there, is that for both the LGBTQ community, but also for others, because film is a universal medium, it's a way to share in the community experience of film. And the reality is that in aggregate, there's a lot of depressing news. But when you go to something like a film festival in a town like Paducah, Kentucky, that's where you see inclusion come alive. And film festivals can celebrate the community in a way that's very inclusive, as we talked about before. It's not just for lesbians in Paducah, Kentucky, right? It's something that's very inclusive. It can tell the story of our community well beyond the communities we build that might be narrow.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I have no excuse now. All right. The fourth story this week comes from the USTA and the American Tennis Association, which just launched a major initiative to boost Black representation in tennis, a sport historically dominated by whiteness. So only 2 Black men have ever won a Grand Slam. But this collaboration aims to change that with mentorship programs to support these players and coaches from the junior level on up. So I love that this is happening, especially during this time. And I say that even as a pickleball player.
All right. Yeah, I played tennis when I was a kid, but I started to see on my Twitter feed this weekend a deluge of professional sports teams from around the world sending out messages of support for Pride. And I
Mm,
thought that was quite hopeful. And I believe that sport really has a huge opportunity. It's a bit like hospitality to build followers in diverse communities. And that, those communities then have to go and see the people that reflect them on the court, whether it's a basketball court or a tennis court or any other, or a pickleball court. It doesn't necessarily matter what the court is. Um, and one of the things I've been impressed with here in Paris is, so it's the French Open right now,
mm.
and the French Tennis Federation is spending a significant amount of resource to grow tennis by opening facilities which have traditionally been very exclusive, very suburban, very white, and financially supporting some amazing tennis players and ultimately making tennis more interesting in this country for a wider audience. And so that's the hope that comes from this story for me. And I think it's something that we'll start to see. And one of those black champions, I think, is Yannick Noah. So he's French.
Absolutely. And you know what? Obviously, it's good for business, right?
It's
Couldn't
yes.
couldn't be more clear.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, and the last story this week comes from this is an interesting one. When the Trump administration gutted USAID, it canceled 83% of contracts, leaving $35 billion of global aid in limbo. So, economist Caitlin Tulloch and her former employees launched the Project Resource Optimization Pro, which is a matchmaking service that connects philanthropists to life-saving foreign aid programs on the brink. They have triaged over 22,000 defunded projects. Wow.
Wow. And this is again, when I use the word renaissance, I think this is where necessity will be the mother of invention,
Mm-hmm.
because the fact is the fact, right? What's happened is happening. It's happening. So that doesn't mean that people don't need to continue to run their businesses and they don't continue to need to eat. I was on a podcast with some colleagues in Hong Kong recently, and a lot of the people who participate in this group are small businesses who are, they're trying to make ends meet. And one of the things we were working with them is to think about how we can make connections with them to try to sort of rebuild some of the bonds that they might have lost from the businesses
Mm.
they were losing. So I think that reading that story gave me hope, because that and it reminds me that people like myself who have built a network over 30 plus years, it's also my obligation to be one of those kind of fire starters and continue to connect people, because the talent that exists in our world of inclusion professionals and HR professionals is massive, and it would be wasted if we didn't continue to try to nurture those people, so that when again the renaissance happens, that they're all prepared to take it to the next level.
I agree. All right. Good vibes indeed. Okay, let's move into this week's good vibes to go. I'll share mine and then invite you to share yours. So, my good vibe to go is a book recommendation. Tomorrow Will Be Different by U.S. Senator Sarah McBride, who is the first transgender senator and member of Congress. So, this book was written before she was elected to office, and it's a great trans memoir. Greg, what is your good vibe to go?
As it relates to that book, I can't wait to read the sequel to that, because she's certainly going to have a
Right.
lot of stories to tell, which
Exactly.
she's already telling them. So I'm doing two things. One is relatively new, and one is a tried and true one for me. And the relatively new one is to get myself off of social media as much as I was. I've decided to, and I'm being pretty good about it, to every couple of weeks buy two books.
Hmm.
One is a book about this place that I live, that I'm trying to understand the language and the culture. So I buy something about France, French history, French culture, whatever it is. And then I buy a second book at the same time that has nothing to do with that at all. So it has to do, I just read a book on Irish short stories. I'm reading a book on millennial thinking. So really trying to do that. And the reason I'm doing that is it's also challenging myself to keep my mind open.
Mm,
So getting out of the wormhole that can be social media, but also trying to learn things that maybe I would not gravitate to directly.
mm,
Um, and the second thing is something that I've been doing for a while, and it's uh, it's when I get in bed at night, I'm very diligent about thinking about what are two things that I'm grateful for from the day.
mm,
And it doesn't have to be huge things. Like it could be that, I didn't lose my phone that day, or I found my phone, or I had a good meal. I mean, something, that makes me feel, it reminds me of that life is good.
mm.
And that I'm still there. I used to have a woman that I worked with, and her father was quite elderly. And when he would wake up in the morning, the first thing he would say is, "Oh, that's good." I kind of think of that like, okay, I'm happy to be to live in that world. And also, it's medically proven that if you are grateful before you go to bed, it helps you sleep better, it lowers your heart rate, it builds your immunity, and there are many other health benefits from that. And then I also try to think about one thing that I'd like to do better tomorrow. And
Mm,
that then is the impetus for me to get up a little bit earlier in the morning and get at it.
mm. Oh,
Because
interesting.
every day is a new day and a new opportunity to be grateful for something at the end of that day.
Yeah, I agree. I'd have a gratitude practice as well, not before bed, but that's a good idea. Although I would say for me, thinking about one thing to do better tomorrow before bed would not allow me to sleep. So, just personally. All right, Greg, it has been a treat having you on the show today. How can folks get in touch with you?
Thank you. I am on LinkedIn at Greg Morley, and you can also access me at my website, which is gregmorley.com, or on Instagram at Mr. Greg 852.
All right, Greg, we will make sure all of that gets put in the show notes. It has been a treat. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I just love this podcast, and I'm working my way through the past episodes. And thank you for the hope and the joy you bring to what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Please spread the word about this show. Would love to expand the audience. Folks, if you don't already get the Five Things newsletter, you can subscribe at fivethingsdei.com. Thanks so much. Have a great week.